Hello, my name is Crystal Petry, and you are watching another episode of the Crystal Petry Podcast, Season 4. Trauma can shape your story, but it does not have to define your future. Today's guest, Dr. Sanchez, survived 14 years of childhood abuse and transformed that pain into a life devoted to healing others. From the island of Jamaica to becoming a guide for those reclaiming their power, Dr. Sanchez is here to show us what's possible on the other side of trauma. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Sherone Smith Sanchez. How are you?
I am well and happy. How about you?
That is good. I am well and happy as well. But that intro was very good for you. No one has ever said that. Normally they'll say, I'm fine, I'm okay. But the fact that you really leaned into the happy part, I love it.
Thank you.
I love it. So where in the world are you, Dr. Sanchez?
I am right now in New York.
Okay. Are you keeping warm over there?
I am inside.
Inside, absolutely. Can you share what was it like growing up on the island of Jamaica?
The island of Jamaica will forever be my island paradise. And very few people realize that the name is really Zemaka, which is land of wood and water. And that tells you everything you need to know. I grew up singing, dancing, learning to be resilient, learning what no problem man really, really means, and really taking the kiss of the sun for granted.
Oh, wow. How did your cultural background shape your strength and your worldview?
That's a good question because we are known around the world for being a tenacious, resilient people. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we are assertive people. We take life by the at the root, if you will. But we also understand the power of levity, the power of laughing at things that others take for granted. In fact, there's something my grandmother used to say. She used to say, we have to take serious thing, make laugh. So we laugh at situations that come up because there's an understanding culturally where we're taught that troubles come and troubles go. But resiliency is about flexibility and finding joy in your circumstance.
When you look back on your childhood growing up in Jamaica, what stands out the most now?
Playing, laughing. For a while, I did not remember the first 10 years of my life due to abuse. And I want to say that, by the way, I was raised by two powerful, amazing professional people who nurtured me when they were present.
Okay.
But for the most part, I was raised by what is known as a nanny here, but is known as a helper. And the most present nanny that I had, I think was the most powerful one for me. And she came into my life after maybe age 10, 11. And so when I look back on my childhood, I actually don't remember the first 10 years, but I remember the rest of my years of my childhood with her. Her name was Miss Teresa, and Miss Teresa was my stand-in mother and my protector.
Now, you have spoken about your abuse, Dr. Sanchez. You experienced that abuse for 14 years. If you are emotionally ready, I would like for you to describe to us in some kind of detail some of the abuse that you suffered and how did that shape your sense of self?
I am emotionally ready. Um, by the way, I want to say my first book is called Talawa Turf, because the word Talawa is a Twi word
Mm-hmm.
that means powerful, strong, strong in places where you should be weak. And I start with that by saying that, as I said, my parents were nurturing people who were very busy people. And so I would sometimes, when the helper was not present, would be sent to my grandmother's home. Or the helper they had at that time wasn't someone, she was rather apathetic.
Mm-hmm.
So the abuse wasn't always just sexual. Abuse can be mental, right?
Yes.
Right. Um, so I would be sent to my grandmother's, where at 2 was the first time that I was sexually violated.
Oh,
Because
wow.
unfortunately, at that time, my grandmother, who later did a great job of dealing with her alcoholism, at that time, she functioned in an alcoholic zone. And so I was first raped by a visiting family member to my grandmother's home. Um, and, it's stated by my family that I actually did not speak until I was about 3. Now that I'm an educator and an expert in child development, I know that that's called selective mutism.
Mm-hmm.
But the abuse was so shocking that I did not speak. And then went on. I think what happened was they did not tell my parents. They did not bring me to a therapist. Later on, I learned that I had an aunt who had gone to give birth to a child and returned 2 weeks after my abuse, was told what happened, and she then brought me to a physician.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that my parents were ever told. In fact, when I told my parents at 20 some odd years old, they were shocked and horrified and pained, because my parents are overly protective people and only allowed my brother and I to be exposed to whom they thought was safe.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue then becomes, now my maternal family begin to talk amongst each other. And now the abusers are coming out of the woodwork because, and this happens a lot in our families in the global majority around the world, now it becomes about their shame.
Yes.
Right? It becomes about
Yes.
them not wanting to, why you took the child to the doctor, now people are going to know.
No.
Right.
Yes.
But it became this exercise in protecting the abusers, who now had a field day, because now they knew they could not be traced to further sexual abuse. And it was heinous. It was sexual abuse. It was, painful. And what happened to me is, I think after 10, of course, I become aware. Now I'm being groomed. And there was a primary abuser, actually, who was an uncle by marriage, who became my primary abuser. It's kind of sad because his wife, actually, who was my favorite aunt, died recently. And for many years after I spoke to her, I finally did talk to her. And the abuse ended, by the way, at 16. So it started at 2, and now it becomes other abusers in that side of the family. And after a while, the others kind of fade. But now is this one uncle who was a principal.
Wow.
Who did this to many, many other children, one of whom they adopted. And some of my abuse was done. She and I slept in the same bed when I visited their home. And yes, I was sent to visit their home. because they were safe. And so it was either I was abused or that child was abused. My book, Talawa Turf, is dedicated to all the people who didn't live. And she was one of the ones who did not live.
Oh, wow.
So I'm actually going to re-release that book. And I protected my aunt for the longest time. She's now gone on. But my book and most of my work is dedicated to a little girl who I'll call Z, who was abused often right next to me, with me.
Did your aunt not know, or did she just decide that she did not want to acknowledge the abuse?
That's a really good question. Because, as I said, when I finally, at 20 something, I'd become pregnant, and suddenly the nightmares I'd had sporadically now kept coming almost every night. And now I was about to have a child, and I had begun the journey to heal, but now I had this child, and I didn't want to keep having these nightmares and being upset throughout the course of this child's life. So I started this fact-finding mission. I began to go through my family and ask questions. And I started asking questions, hey, did anything happen to me as a small child that you all want to tell me about? I started going around asking those questions. And in that stream of asking those kinds of questions, everyone said, no, don't know what you're talking about, because they had all agreed that
to protect yes,
the abusers.
The abuser, yes.
And I got to this aunt, and I asked her that question, and she said, no, don't remember. And then I said to her, because she still lived in Jamaica at the time, but she had come to visit. And she was in Connecticut, far away. I actually got in a car with my husband and drove there to talk to her, because I wanted to know, did you know that your husband did this to me? And she was shocked. Well, what do you mean, my husband? Oh no, let's call him on the phone right now. I said, let's call him on the phone. I'll call him and you listen.
Very smart, very smart.
And I called him. And unfortunately, she wanted to dial. Which years later I realized, of course, that something was into something. And she said, I'll dial for you. And she dials on her phone. And she quickly hangs up. Oh, he's not available. And she said that could not possibly have been my husband. Not at all. But as the years rolled on, I began to suspect that it was highly possible that she knew, but had been experiencing her own forms of abuse. And so was silent. Before she died, I tried again. I actually wrote to her, and her response to me was, is there something I've done that you cannot forgive me for? And I said, well, you're quite forgiven. You're quite forgiven.
Okay.
But I want you to understand, because the story that she gave, by the way, was that the way that she'd heard it when she confronted her husband was that the 10-year-old child was very fresh, and that 10-year-old child seduced him.
The 10-year-old
seduced him. He was almost 40. And that the 10-year-old child seduced him, and that he was so sorry for that affair, and he'd never do it again. And so when she responded to my mother and I, her response was that she felt that I owed her an apology for having had an affair with her husband.
No, Dr. Sanchez.
Yes.
No.
Um, there are other situations that have occurred over the years, but I want to say this, and I want to speak well of the dead, not just to speak well of the dead, but because in my studies and really looking at what happens to victims of abuse, of all kinds of abuse, I realize that one of the things they begin to do is to sometimes protect the abuser.
Yes.
Because it makes them safe, or so
Yes.
they imagine. But I wrote back to her to say, in no uncertain terms, I will tell you that because I'd gone to my island and she'd invited me to her home. So I took that opportunity to respond. I created a voice note, a recording, which I kept and shared with the rest of my family. Because now I'm on Talawa turf. Now I want you all to know I do not accept your shame. I do not accept your degradation. I do not accept your pretending that nothing happened. And so my response to her was, what you owe my parents an apology for making their child unsafe in your home.
Mm-hmm.
You owe my parents an apology because when the abuse happened, I was not quiet and it occurred in your home. So you must have known something occurred to me and to the other child. The other child in question became pregnant, I'm told, and actually was sent away from their home.
Pregnant by the uncle?
This is what I'm told. I am not always one to repeat tales, but I'm told
Right.
that that's what occurred. I know that she became so depressed, so unhappy. And I know she died as a result of that sadness. I won't go into her story in great detail because it's her story and her family's story. But what I will say is before she died, my aunt actually called my mother as a result of my asking that she apologize to my parents. And my mother, I was not there for the apology, but my mother told me that she apologized to her for making me unsafe. When people pass away, it's my belief spiritually that the dead just simply take another form. And I went to my island and I had to go to the funeral home, and they had me they gave me an opportunity to be in the room with her to say goodbye.
Did she ever apologize to you for what you suffered and endured in her home, and not acknowledging what happened to you in her home?
No. However, I want you and everyone to know that in most instances, us survivors will not get that apology. But what I said to her in that room, as unfortunately her body lay still, was, thank you for giving my parents an apology. Thank you because that alone takes some level of guts.
True.
This was a woman who did not apologize. I did not expect an apology. Neither is my healing based on whether or not I receive an apology. And that's something I want people to understand. Your healing is for you. Your healing is not for all these other people. They are often still in a sin-sick, depraved space. So in most instances, they're not going to even understand how to give an apology. And if they gave it to you, how would it add to your healing?
That's really true. That was going to be my next question. Would it have even helped if you did receive the apology?
It wouldn't. What added to my healing was being able to drop the weight of the shame and the degradation that didn't belong to me. It belonged to all those people. It belonged to the people who were mentally depraved to the point where they thought it necessary to protect an abuser. It belonged to the abuser, who is themselves, in most instances, people who practice pedophilia and abuse were once victims themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it belongs to, that load belongs to those people. It doesn't belong to me. I now have a responsibility to walk out of all of that, to leave that behind, and to really go forth on my own Talawa turf, on my space of strength. It's for me to look at what was special about me, why these negative demonic forces were attempting to get in my way before I could advance to who I am. What
Have
is
you answered that question?
Oh, girl, I sure have. What is special about me is that
Yes.
I was born to agitate and destroy lies. I was born to walk other people out of trauma. One of my special heroes is the only female national hero in my country. Her name is Nani.
Mm-hmm.
And Nanny was a woman who led other people. She would pull her sword, her cutlass, and she would go to those slave ships and she would free those slaves and run up into the hills and bring them into the hills to safety. I was born with my own sword in my hand to cut the throat of every enemy and to walk people out of degradation and shame and trauma. And that's what I do every single day. Every day. I bring strength to leaders because I am an expert in organizational leadership. I bring strength to schools because I am an educator. I bring strength to people and children because I am clergy. I bring strength to students because I am a professor. And I, every single day, take that seriously. But what I take more than anything else seriously is the responsibility to remain balanced and whole every single day, because I cannot be Nanny in your life and pull you out of the flames of destruction and fear and trauma if I am in a destroyed state myself.
Right. Dr. Sherone Smith Sanchez, thank you so much for being vulnerable on this podcast. My next question is specifically for my community. Because as you and I know, there are so many people, male and female, who have experienced sexual abuse and sexual trauma.
Yes.
And they have not managed to work their way through that. They sometimes start drinking. They sometimes turn to alcohol. They sometimes, unfortunately, maybe turn to suicide, depression. It could be someone sitting right in front of you, having a conversation with you that has suffered sexual abuse and will never tell you, but they are suffering in silence.
Yes.
What tangible work did you do to help you in your healing so that the people that are listening now can start that tangible work to help in their healing?
Tangible work was about finding community that could help. Remember, I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that my parents insisted on, I wasn't allowed to go to many places. I could go to church, school, home. I was a child performer, so I could go and perform with the support of my coaches. But my world was very small.
Mm-hmm.
But the place that I went and heard about healing was church. And, it's a space I heard about it, but I did not begin to think of the great God as my personal healer till I
Mm-hmm.
was about 12. And I learned that the great God was my personal healer from listening to other people. That's when I began to realize that I could I could begin to like myself. I had a feeling, as I said, I couldn't remember. I would try to remember. Oh my goodness, I'm trying to remember what it was. But other children would talk about when I was little, and I just couldn't.
Right.
Um, but we had something at high school. I went to high school at 9 and a half. And we had something there called ICF, International Christian Students Fellowship. And they would come and they'd talk about this thing. And they weren't very pressuring, but they'd ask, can we pray for you? And I'm like, yeah, sure. But that's the beginning of it. I know it sounds sort of roundabout, but that's the beginning of learning. I didn't start getting healing from other people, but what I got was the idea that I could, in private, begin to have conversations with this God.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I began having these conversations with this God, who, by the way, I refuse to assign a gender.
Correct. That's a humanistic thinking.
Right. But I began to have conversations and I began to sort of spill and explain how I felt. And from there came ideas that I began to read in the Bible. And it wasn't until I got much older, at church, I began to make connections, and I then had a mentor. And my mentor's name is Anna Morrison. And I began asking her questions about, well, what if somebody says that that if you tell on them that your mother's going to die? Because that's, by the way, is the lie I was told, why I didn't out this primary abuser earlier. I was told my mother would die. And I took him very seriously.
Yeah.
And so
you were a child. So yes.
And so I began to talk to Anna, and I can use Anna's name publicly now because we've talked and I have her permission. But I wouldn't tell her it was me. What if? And she said to me, first of all, God is your protector. Second of all, that's a lie. That's a lie from the pit of hell. She spoke like that. Mm-hmm. And she said, your mother will not die if you, and she strictly, your mother will not die if you begin to talk to people about what has happened to you. She was very direct. Mm-hmm. And I remember I left her at church. We were at a rehearsal. And I remember running home. I ran home to see if my mother was still alive. So I was 16, and it seems silly that at 16 you would be like, oh, my mother's going to die, but I ran home.
It does not.
But once I ran home and I saw that she was alive, I didn't tell her what happened to me, but I began to sort of skirt around it with my helper, mm-hmm. who I called my stand-in parent, Miss Teresa. And I didn't tell Miss Teresa it was me, but she began to suspect. And this gentleman would come. He became brazen enough to come during the summer because my mother was an educator and she would be at school working. And he would come to abuse me there in the summer. But there, my healing really began at 16 years old when he came and he said, go in the room. And he would send me to my parents' room. Mm-hmm. Go in the room. And I called my friends, 3 of my friends, because now I had strength. Now I understood that my healing would come from community. That's when I began to really understand the power of community. So yeah, the trajectory of healing began with prayer. Then it began with feeling strengthened from that prayer, to have conversations with the person who would become my mentor, and then having the strength to then include that community, and extend it to my helper and my 3 friends who I asked. Once he called and he said he was coming, I said, I'm set for you. And I called my friends to come. They sat in the living room, and my helper, once he told me to go in the room, I, on my way to the room, told her I was going to the room. And he came into the room, he shut the door, and she came and stood by the door. And now I had enough strength to stand face to face and say, you big church deacon, you big principal, this is your last day you're going to touch me. And he began with the narrative, your mother's going to die, and my mother's not going to die. This is your last time touching me. Your last time. And by the way, I have people outside this door to help me to beat you to a pulp. And I said, Miss Teresa, you there? And she said, Medea. And I opened the door. He didn't say a word. He looked at her and he exited. My healing began when I began to take up my own sword and cut down the enemy myself. I took back my own strength, took back my own healing, took back my own dignity, because I had been for the longest time convinced that I was not deserving of strength or dignity or healing. And so it began there. Then I began to really rapidly grow, spend a lot of time talking to my mentor, moved to the point in my own spiritual growth where I eventually trained to become clergy, who was centered on counseling with others, spending time with others. And I still continue in the path of my healing. And by the way, I also at some point found enough strength to get therapy, which I often tell people in my book, Talawa Turf. I actually have a chapter dedicated to my mentor friend. I write poetry, and I actually have a poem that's dedicated to my mentor friend. I had other mentors. My path to healing included therapy. It included prayer. It included a strong time spent in the reading of the word. It includes reading other things that other people write. It included connection with not just a mentor. One of the things in our recent book, Triumph in the Trenches, we have a trilogy, Indie Award-winning Triumph in the Trenches. And one of the things I say to people is get good company and grow. And so healing for me was about creating a community of other healers, and a community of other people who are in the process of being healed, because it's a daily process. I actually responded to someone today, 2 people today, who asked me, how do I stay in a healed place? And I stay in a healed place by scanning daily. I scan myself daily. Every single day, I'm mentally scanning. I'm looking to see, how am I feeling today? And I look for the spaces where I'm content. I learn to count my blessings, but every day I'm in a throes and in a cycle of healing. Every single day that cycle starts with me waking up. Lord, thank you for waking me up today. And how do I feel now? And once I've scanned, I'm in that process of breathing, exercising, praying, accepting what concerns me and ignoring what's not my concern. That's not my monkey, not my bailiwick. I will not be handling it. Creating healthy boundaries for others and finding the spaces where I'm content. I am content. Not the kind of happiness where it's like, la, 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 and I'm acting like I have no sense. But I am content with where God has me. There was a time when it was like I was about to lose my mind, but every day I'm balanced and I'm whole. and I'm peaceful. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely. Will the healing ever be complete, or is healing an every single day? What's the word I'm looking for? Or is healing something you do every single day? That's my question.
That's a great question. And yes, healing is an everyday thing. Healing is an everyday business, as we say in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, oh, I'm healed and I'm whole and I'm in the right place and I'm fantastic. There's no such thing. I know there's people running around saying that, but there's no nirvana of healing.
Mm-hmm.
There's no perfection. There's every day I get up and I make a decision to live. If I could tell your audience anything, it would be that. It would be make a decision to live every single day. Because when someone has violated your body and or your mind, you're also convinced that you're not worth living.
Yes, yes.
So I make a decision every day to live, to be joyful. I make a decision every day to celebrate some small thing. My children, ranging from 42 to 21, my grandchildren, every single day I find something to live and to laugh about every day.
My next question, if I'm being honest with you, Dr. Sanchez, I almost don't want to ask it, but I'm going to.
Okay.
Have you forgiven your abusers? And the reason that I don't want to ask it is because I feel like, and this is just the human side of me, that they do not deserve your forgiveness. But I do know, like healing, forgiveness is not for them, it is for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have I forgiven them? Absolutely. In fact, guys, some of this tea is about to appear in my next book. But when I went, one of the outcomes of going to the funeral was that there were all these people, my the family of the child who was abused were there. There were all these people who were witnesses to my abuse who said and did nothing. And they're often shocked by what God has done in my life because they expected me to have the same demise as Z. But what was interesting, the person who was most shocked was my primary abuser, the husband of this aunt. And I entered the room. My children have this joke. They say, "Mom, you always enter the room like you own it." I said, "I do."
All right.
I am the daughter of a king.
All right.
I am Ohema. When I enter the room, I own every room that I enter. And so I entered his house like I owned it. And I want to tell you the fear that just came over this man. He sort of quivered. He was this pathetic image. And he jumps up from the chair and he grabs my elbow and he said, "I just want to tell you, I just want to apologize. I'm really That's an apology, by the way. I received an apology from him. But by the time I got his apology, I didn't care.
Right, because you're healing.
Exactly. Yes. And so I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. And so I looked at him, just sort of extricating my arm, and I said, "Thank you for the apology, but it really doesn't matter. You are forgiven. You've been forgiven. You need to go on and do better." There are folks who would say, "Well, that was a moment of achievement," and but by the time he had the apology rumbling out of his stomach, it really, what was rumbling wasn't a real apology. What was rumbling was his fear. My victim has come back. She's strengthened. My victim is the eulogist for my wife.
Wow.
Crap. What is she going to say?
To say in front of all of these people.
In front of all these people.
Yes.
Brother, I don't even care. I want you healed as well. Because in order for you to have done this to all these children, you must have been in a very unhealed state. And if you don't heal, then you're going to continue doing it to other people till the day you die. So have I forgiven him and all the others? Absolutely. Forgiveness doesn't mean that now I'm going to sort of put myself in harm's way again and again. Forgiveness, by the way, please recall that I told him and his wife that their home was not a safe place for me, even as an adult. So now that I've entered his home after the death of his wife, he realizes that I am strong enough to enter his home. Mm-hmm. I now have entered his home with my spiritual sword right by my side. You will not harm me or not another person in this home, not while I'm here. Yes. So forgiveness means that you have now become your own Talawanani. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness means that you have no strength, no power over me, none. I can forgive you because I can see you for the pathetic being that you were. That's what you were. Unfortunately, that's what you still are. And in my prayers now, my forgiveness has allowed me to pray that you now become whole and delivered from being that slithering, harmful being to other human beings. Because, brother, you're about to go the way of eternity soon. You're going to need that wholeness to walk into the presence of the Most High, because the Most High does not play about me.
When I tell you, Dr. Sanchez, you are living and walking in that scripture where it says, pray for your enemies.
Absolutely.
You are living and walking in it. I am amazed.
But listen, I'm walking in the scripture also that says, touch not the Lord's anointed, and neither do the prophets any harm. It is dangerous to touch God's anointed. And clearly, I was his anointed from the very beginning, which is why the enemy worked so hard to destroy my life and my self-esteem.
From the very beginning.
From the very beginning. But I want you to know, anybody that attempts to touch the Lord's anointing, not a good idea. I have now in my prayers for anyone who has harmed or will harm me, my prayers are, Almighty, have mercy. Because understand that the frustration, the terror that this man must live in, the wife who protected him is now gone. People who were abused like me are now adults, walking around, able to tell his story from our side. My aunt is no longer around. I can tell his story, and I have witnesses to back it up.
Yes.
Do I want to harm him in that way? No, I want him whole. I want him healed and whole. That's what I want for every abuser. You've got to understand that I now realize that every abuser has experienced some sort of trauma in their life that has evolved to this thing. They need to begin their cycle and their path to healing. And they haven't. So they're in this traumatized hell on earth space. And so there's a level of compassion that I carry, that I want every single abuser to be healed and to continue the cycle of healing. But I want everyone who has experienced any kind of trauma, any kind of abuse, And by the way, that includes church abuse, because I do have a chapter in the book that I call church rape.
It's a real thing. Church abuse, church hurt, church rape. It happens.
Yes, because abusers find cover in spaces that live according to a rehearsed narrative. So there's a difference between being the ecclesia, the called out ones, the true church of the living God, and being in a space where you're part of this narrative that really doesn't speak truth to power, doesn't live by prayer, doesn't live by walking out of harm and sin, and that frankly protects abusers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do speak to that abuse is not just a sexual thing or a mental thing. Church abuse is very, very real. I talk to people about theophobia and the fact that fear spirit infuses itself in just about every facet of people's lives. And the idea is to put such terror in you that you do not stand up to become who you are and whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dr. Sanchez, as a clergy, as a counselor, as a guide, how do you know, and how does someone know who's listening when they are ready to heal from sexual abuse, mental trauma, physical abuse?
Being tired. Somebody else just wrote to me today on social media and asked, anybody else feeling this tired feeling? And that tired feeling is you're tired of living. You're tired of talking about it. You're tired of feeling like you're nobody. You're tired. You feel like you can barely hold up your head. That's when you're ready. Rock bottom is rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Abuse of substances, being abused by someone else or by this substance. You're tired. You're at the end. You're at rock bottom. You just cannot. I want to tell you, by the way, in my lifetime, I attempted to die by suicide twice. That's how you know, is when you're at the end and you begin to take on, what is really the weight and the shame of the abuser. And it's weighing you down and you know that you can barely take another breath. That's when you know. Reach out for help, whether it be anonymous help. There's actually a texting line that you can text when you are feeling that you're at the end of that rope anonymously. Reach out, if it's even anonymously, to begin that journey to healing. But that's how you know when you're ready to heal, when you cannot stand up.
How do you teach someone that the trauma that was inflicted on them, the trauma that happened to them, is not who they are?
Mm-hmm. I do things I call circles. And in those circles, in fact, I'm getting ready to do a triumph circle soon, right around March. I do marriage circles. And what I do is I allow people to think about some questions. Among those questions would be, what happened? What happened to put me in this space? Or do I know someone who has experienced some kind of trauma? Because a lot of times people don't want to talk about their trauma.
They do not.
Just like I didn't know. I went around saying, what if someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I allow people to reflect on someone else's trauma that they've witnessed. And I ask them, in that instance, what happened to that person? Where is that person now? What are the things that that person needs to help them to walk out of that space of feeling stuck? I sometimes ask people I might give them rocks or I might give them a piece of paper, and I say, I want you to write your prayer down. And in that prayer, write what you need or that person needs to walk whole. And I'm holding up for you one of my prayer boxes. You won't see the prayers in them. Yes. These are the prayer boxes. And I have more than one, but this is my main prayer box that remains with me. And I pray over this prayer box at least weekly because I'm praying with other people. Because it's walking out of trauma is not this, oh, you have a session, you had a circle with Dr. Smith Sanchez, and now you feel better. I'm not one of those people. I'm not one of those people that come to your church, by the way. I don't charge honorariums for going to churches. I don't ask people. In fact, if I come to your church, do not collect an offering in my honor. Do not. I don't want your money. I want nothing. If you invite me to teach a workshop, then yes, feel free to, get on my Talawa Turf website and click contact me. But when I do these circles in church environments, especially, I collect people's prayers. If I do a workshop circle, I ask people, because I also acknowledge and respect everyone's decision and desire to walk their path, their spiritual path for themselves, or not walk a spiritual path. So for people who are on different paths and planes, I ask them, if you pray, please put a prayer here. And if you don't pray and you don't want to pray, perhaps you're an atheist, which is perfectly fine. Write down for me what you need and what you need to become whole. I tell everybody that it does go in my prayer box. So if they don't want it to go in my prayer box, that's cool. But I take it and I put it in my box. But how I walk people through is to have people to begin to draw the experience from the past into their present and to sit with it presently and to examine it in a safe space. And once they've examined it in that safe space, now they decide, what do I want to happen next? And now that I want this thing to happen next, I'm going to write it down. I'm going to write it down and I'm going to hand it to you. Sometimes I say to them, if you want to write it down and write one for yourself, write one for me, but I collect them. There are some workshops I do where I have people address a note to themselves, and I wait about 2 weeks later and I send it to them by mail. Because what happens is when people have these transformative experiences, it feels good. It's wonderful. I feel so good. And then they leave and they go back to the darkness.
Right. Because you have to go home.
Because you have to go home. So you need somebody to remind you what it is you said you were going to do. And something that reminds you what you said you were going to do. And so that's how I help people to start on the journey, is to pull stuff into the present. But I also encourage people to be present with it every day. Mm-hmm. I know that sounds crazy, that you want to walk out of trauma, but then you want to be present with the trauma. The reason is that one of the things that people do with trauma is they repress and they dissociate. And dissociation feels safe because you're not thinking about it, but it really isn't safe. Dissociation allows you to sort of mentally separate yourself from it so that every time you come back to the trauma, it's shocking and it's fearful and it does all these horrible boogeyman things to you. But you have to sit with it every day and sit with, this thing is not my fault. And really fight with that thing that says it's your fault, because it's a fight.
It is.
We wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? There's this whole spiritual piece that wants you to live in that place of shame, degradation, and
blaming yourself.
Self-blame. So every day you have to look at it and you have to say, if you have to say it aloud, right? Things happen in the amygdala, in the brain space when you say things aloud. You've got to say aloud, this is not me. I actually, for a while, now I can do it, quietly without, people realizing I'm doing it. But for a while, I would have to go in, shut the door in the bathroom and look in the mirror and go, none of this was your fault. You are, Hema, you are an empress. You are of the royal priesthood and called by the living God. You are. You have to look in that mirror and tell yourself who you are. And so I talk to people about that. I don't believe in what often happens in a lot of these circles or self-help kinds of experiences, church experiences even. We open wounds for people and we leave those wounds open and they leave open.
And a lot of times they leave worse than when they came.
Yes, because now you've done all this bawling and boo-hooing, and you leave with that. Yes, you've done some kind of crying and you feel cleansed for 5 seconds, but you go back to it because you're not present. You're not living with it in the present. So you've got to live with this thing in the present. Talk to yourself about what happened. Talk to yourself about what will not happen again, and talk to yourself about how you will actively walk out of that pain. And for many, many people, most people, it's go get some therapy. And don't be afraid of interviewing the right therapist, before you find the right one. Another thing I want to say is, and I talk about this as clergy all the time, not all clergy is safe. Mm-hmm. There's not all therapists are safe.
Correct.
Because they are people with unhealed wounds who have not begun the path often to healing. So a lot of people cover their unhealed space by trying to heal other people. So interview them. When you walk away from that experience with them, do you feel hope? Or do you feel in some way, are you attaching yourself to them for the wrong reasons? Mm-hmm. No, or do you have, celebrity eyes, stars in your eyes? Oh, this person spoke to me, right. And they're brilliant, and just that's not going to help you. Can this person really speak to your pain and really hold your hand and walk you out of that pain? Another thing I have to tell people is I do some pastoral counseling, but the minute I begin to realize that someone needs a clinical intervention, I am not your girl. Mm-hmm. I know my limitations. I can be a friend. I can be the friend to pray with you. I can be the mentor to coach you into sort of advancement in your career and that sort of thing. But you need somebody who understands you from a clinical perspective, and maybe someone a psychiatrist who will help you with medication, because sometimes we need to abate all of these mental upheavals in order to be able to be present and deal with the issues and to walk out of the harm. So some people are going to need clinical therapy and talk therapy at the same time.
As we get ready to wrap up, Dr. Sanchez, what is your intention in this space of being vulnerable with your own trauma and helping other people with their trauma?
In September, I'll be 60.
Well, happy early birthday.
Thank you. And usually that indicates that you're you're doing the other half of your life. Happily for me, my relatives live a long time. My father's 93. My relatives have lived to 100, and I expect to live that long. But what I want to do with the rest of my days is to continue to love people. I know that sounds like a simple answer, but
loving people is difficult. That is not a simple answer.
It is. Helping people to heal means that you love them enough to find out what they need. So it's not a Band-Aid for everyone. I don't have all the answers, but I certainly have the love. So there are people who in coming days, I will take a walk with them. And by the way, I walk up to 3.2 miles every day. And there are people with whom I will walk and I will just hold space. I will not speak. I will let them speak. There are people who they just need to be with somebody who's not demanding anything of them. Mm-hmm. And there are people who I will walk with and I will ask them those circle questions. And if they let me, I'll pray for them and pray with them. There are people who I will encounter in my world in the next few days where I will be teaching a lecture and I will look and I will watch their faces and I will see which student in my class needs my love and needs me to explain this information in a different way. And there's that student in my class who they haven't submitted the assignment on time and they are worried that I am going to come down on them. And that student I'm going to love and I'm going to say, hey, let's have a conversation. What's happening? What do you need? They're often very shocked by that question. But they'll tell me what they need. And then I'll say, I'll give you this extension to this date. Or if they need me to say, nope, I'm not going to give you an extension because you don't need an extension right now. You need somebody to make you accountable and to be in this space and to be present. So what am I going to do now and past that 60th year? I'm going to love people. I'm going to do the thing that my enemy was hoping that I wouldn't grow to be able to do, which is to walk other people out of trauma and into a whole relationship with the spirit that made them.
Dr. Sherone Smith Sanchez, I cannot thank you enough. I do not have the words for what you have given on this podcast, who you have been on this podcast, and the healing and the help for every person that will hear this podcast and hear your voice and hear your story. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. And I have one last thing to say to you.
Mm-hmm.
I love you.
I'm glad I'm included in the loving people parts. To my community, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. You can get Dr. Sanchez podcast and all of my other podcasts on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.